With a heavy heart, I'm here to report that Burt Reynolds, movie star, is dead at 82. Yep, Burt Reynolds died at 82 years old. He was a movie star. A lot of people don't know he was a pro football player also. But his biggest thing was Smokey and the Bandit. He was big in that movie. And that movie was in the 70s. And I remember it well because I was a CB'er. I was on the CB and I was a teenager. And we talked to people all over the country on the CB, especially at night. You could bounce the signal on the atmosphere and talk to people all over the country. It was the first way to really communicate where anybody could get a CB and do that. When this movie came out, Smokey and the Bandit, there was C.W. McCall put out a song, and everybody got a CB. And after that, it was crazy that everybody hung out on the CB on channel 19. That was the place all the truckers talked. And before that, it was mainly truckers that used the CB. They would communicate with each other. They'd tell each other where the speed traps were, and if anything went wrong, they could communicate on channel 19. And then locally in Minnesota, we had channel 11, channel 11. That's where everybody hung out. So you'd go to channel 11 and you'd say breaker 11, and then whoever was talking would say, go ahead, breaker. And then you'd say, hey, this is the Big Mac. I'm looking for the Caribbean Kid. And then if the Caribbean Kid, my friend would come on and say, Caribbean Kid, back at you. And you'd say, okay, 10 whatever. It was 10 codes for everything. 1021 or whatever it was to channel 14 or channel 22 or whatever. You'd go and find a channel that was open, and then you'd go to that channel and then you'd start to talk because it was a clear channel. But again, back to the story. Burt Reynolds dead at 82. The ex-jock from Florida starred in Deliverance. That was a big one too. And Boogie Nights, but preferred making such popular fanfare as Smokey and the Bandit, the Cannonball Run, and Starting Over. So I think his biggest movie ever was Smokey and the Bandit. I know Deliverance was a huge movie too. Huge. And that's the the banjo dueling banjos. That was in Deliverance. Everybody knows that movie. That's, if you're over 50 for sure, because I'm way over 50. And let me tell you, I remember that. Of course, I remember Smokey and the Bandit first, and then Deliverance. So back to the story. Burt Reynolds, the charismatic star of such films as Deliverance, The Longest Yard, another good movie, and Smokey and the Bandit, who set out to have as much fun as possible on and off the screen and wildly succeeded, has died. He was 82. Reynolds, who received an Oscar nomination when he portrayed porn director Jack Horner in Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights 1997, and was the #1 box office attraction for 5-year stretch starting in the late 70s, died Thursday morning at Jupiter Medical Center in Florida. His manager, Eric Kritzer, told The Hollywood Reporter the cause of death was cardiopulmonary arrest, so his heart stopped. Always with a wink, Reynolds shined in many action films, often doing his own stunts, and in such romantic comedies as Starting Over, 1979, opposite Jill Clayborough, and Candice Bergen. The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, 1982, with Dolly Parton. I remember that one. Best Friends, 1982, with Goldie Hawn, and quite aptly, The Man Who Loved Women, 1983, with Julie Andrews. Though beloved by audiences for his brand of frivolous, good old boy fare, the playful Reynolds rarely was embraced by the critics. The first time he saw himself in Boogie Nights, he was so unhappy he fired his agent. He went on to win a Golden Globe, but lost out in the Oscar supporting actor race to Robin Williams for Good Will Hunting. A bitter disappointment for him. I didn't open myself to new writers or risky parts because I wasn't interested in challenging myself as an actor. I was interested in playing and having a good time. Reynolds recalled in his 2015 memoir, But Enough About Me. As a result, I missed a lot of opportunities to show I could play serious roles. By the time I finally woke up and tried to get it right, nobody would give me a chance. Still, Reynolds had nothing to apologize for. He was Hollywood's top-grossing star every year from 1978 to 1982. He was Hollywood's top-grossing star. Wow, I didn't know that. Equaling the longest stretch the business had ever seen since the days of Bing Crosby in the 1940s. Wow. In 1978, he had 4 movies playing in theaters at the same time. Wow. Reynolds' career has also marked by the movies he didn't make. Harrison Ford, Jack Nicholson, and Bruce Willis surely were grateful after he turned down the roles of Han Solo. Wow. He turned down the role of Han Solo. He could have been much more famous if he would have took that role, but Harrison Ford got that, obviously. Retired astronaut Garrett Breedlove and cop John McClane in Star Wars, Terms of Endearment, and Die Hard, respectively. So he turned down Die Hard. He turned down Terms of Endearment. Wow. He often said that passing on James L. Brooks' endearment was one of his worst career mistakes. Nicholson won an Oscar for playing Breedlove. Reynolds also indicated that he was Milos Forman's first choice to play R.P. McMurphy, another Nicholson Oscar-winning turn, in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Wow, he turned that down. That was a famous movie. If you've never seen that, it's really a good movie. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Backed away from playing Batman in the TV in the 1960s. Wow, he could have done that too. And declined the part made famous by Richard Gere in Pretty Woman. Wow. He turned that down too? That's incredible. In John Borman's Deliverance, 1972, based on a book by James Dickey, Reynolds starred as a macho survivalist, Lewis Medlock, one of 4 guys from Atlanta who headed to the wilderness for the weekend. Filmed by Vilmos Zsigmond among the Chattanooga River near the Georgia-South Carolina border, it was an arduous production that Borman shot in sequence. When I asked John why, he said, "In case one of you drowns," Reynolds wrote. That's pretty funny. He had good reason. When Reynolds saw test footage of a dummy in a canoe going over the falls in one scene, he told Borman the scene looked fake. He climbed into the canoe was sent crashing into the rocks and ended up in the hospital. I asked Borman how the new footage looked, and he said, "Like a dummy going over the falls." That's pretty funny, Reynolds wrote. Deliverance, infamous for its uncut 10-minute hillbilly male rape scene, Squeal Like a Pig, was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, but came away empty. It lost out to The Godfather in the Best Picture battle. Well, up against The Godfather, you're going to lose. The Godfather was probably one of the best movies of all time. So, if I had to put only one, he said, if I had to put only one of my movies in a time capsule, it would be Deliverance, Reynolds wrote. I don't know if it's the best acting I've ever done, but it's the best movie I've ever been in. It proved I could act, not only to the public, but to me. 3 months before the movie opened, Reynolds, once described by journalist Scott Tobias as the standard of masculinity, showed off his mustache and other assets when he posed nude on a bearskin rug for Cosmopolitan Centerfold in 1972. And 7 years later, he would become the rare man to grace the cover of Playboy. The Cosmo issue sold an outlandish 1.5 million copies. It had been called the greatest publicity stunts of all time, and it's one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made, he wrote, and I'm convinced it cost Deliverance the recognition it deserved. So he's saying that just because he posed nude in Cosmo, it cost him the Oscar. But I don't know if I believe that. A running back in high school and college who talked with legendary coach Bear Bryant about attending Alabama, Reynolds put his gridiron skills to use in Robert Aldrich, The Longest Yard. That was a great movie too. 1974. Playing Paul Wrecking Crew, who leads his ragtag team of prison inmates in a game against the guards. That was a great movie. He also starred in Semi-Tough, 1977, another football film. Smokey and the Bandit, my favorite, 1977, written and directed by his pal and legendary stuntman Hal Needham, grossed $126 million. That's $508 million for today's money. And only Star Wars took in more that year. Reynolds, who stars as Bo Bandit Darville, hired to transport 400 cases of Coors beer from Texas to Atlanta in 28 hours, noted that, unbelievable as it sounds, Smokey was Alfred Hitchcock's favorite movie. How funny is that? He's bound and down, loaded up and trucking. They gonna do what they said can't be done. He's got a long way to go and a short time to be there. Watch old Bandit run. He was Bandit. It was a great song. You got to hear that song if you've never heard it. Reynolds drives a sleek Pontiac Trans Am in the movie, and after the picture had opened, sales of that model soared. His black car is mentioned in Bruce Springsteen Cadillac Ranch, and the Tampa Bay Bandits, a U.S. Football League team in which he had an ownership stake, was named for the movie. Smokey spawned 2 sequels, and Reynolds went on to work with Needham in the Cannonball Run, 1981, another fun-filled action film that spawned another franchise. His other high-octane films, including Sharky's Machine, and 2 movies, never seen that one, and 2 movies in ex-con Gator McCluskey as ex-con. Smokey and the Bandit, 1977. In Smokey, Reynolds starred alongside Sally Field, and the two were an item for some time. He also had relationships with the likes of Dinah Shore, Inger Stevens, and Chris Everett. He talked about dating Han and Farrah Fawcett in his book. There are times in your life that are so indelible they never fade away. They stay alive. Even 40 years later, Field said in a statement, "My years with Burt never leave my mind. He will be in my history and my heart for as long as I live. Rest in peace, buddy." Reynolds was married to British actress Judy Carne, famous for NBC's Rowan Martin Laugh-In, from 1963 to 1966, and then to Lonnie Anderson. So remember, he was married to Lonnie Anderson, the voluptuous blonde, best known for the CBS sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati. From 1988 to 1993, both marriages were tempestuous. Don't know how to say that word. And his divorce from Anderson was particularly messy. After a string of big screen failures and the cancellation of his ABC private detective series BJ Stryker, Reynolds rejuvenated his career by starring in the 1990 to 1994 CBS sitcom Evening Shade, created by Harry Thompson and Linda Bloodworth Thompson. He won an Emmy Award in 1991 for Best Actor in a Comedy Series for playing Woodrow Wood Newton, a former Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback who returns to his small town in Arkansas to coach a woeful high school team. Burton Milo Reynolds Jr. That was his real name. Burton Milo Reynolds Jr. was born on February 11th, 1936 in Waycross, Georgia, and was raised in Florida's Palm Beach County. His father was an Army veteran who became the police chief in Riviera Beach, Florida, not too far from the Everglades. "My dad was a hero, but he never acknowledged any of my achievements," he wrote in his memoir. "I also felt that no amount of success would make me a man in his eyes." I wonder why. Then known as Buddy Reynolds, he played halfback at Palm Beach High School, where his teammate was future New York Yankees manager Rick Hauser. Then suited up at Florida State, where Lee Corso, later a college coach and ESPN analyst, played on both sides of the ball, but he suffered a knee injury as a sophomore, and that was it for football in Florida State. So he was going to be a big football guy, but he hurt his knee. Reynolds enrolled at Palm Beach Junior College and appeared in a production of Outward Bound, playing the part handled by John Garfield in the 1944 film adaptation Between Two Worlds that led to a scholarship and a summer stock stint at the Hyde Park Playhouse in New York. He roomed with another aspiring actor, Rip Torn, and they studied at the Actors Studio. After a few appearances on Broadway and television, Reynolds was off to Hollywood, where he signed with Universal and manned the wheel as Ben Fraser in Riverboat, an NBC Western that starred Darren McGavin. He met Needham and on that show, and the stuntman would double for him on projects through the years. Reynolds is referenced in The Unknown Stuntman, the theme song from the 1980s ABC series The Fall Guy, and he played an aging stuntman in Needham's second film, Hooper. I remember that. Reynolds joined Gunsmoke for his 8th season in 1962 as Quint Asper, a half Comanche who becomes a Dodge City blacksmith. That's interesting. A lot of people don't know that Burt Reynolds is part American Indian. If you didn't know that, I just told you. He played the title warrior in 1966 spaghetti western Navajo Joe, was an Iroquois who worked as a New York City detective in the short-lived ABC series Hawk and portrayed a Mexican revolutionary in 100 Rifles, 1969. Reynolds also got another shot at toplining his own ABC show playing a detective, Dan August, in 1970 and 71. Reynolds appeared in the NBC's The Tonight Show, and in 1972 became the first non-comedian to sit in for Johnny Carson as a guest host. I didn't know that. Reynolds' first guest that night was his ex-wife, Judy Carn. They hadn't spoken in 6 years, and she made a crack about his older girlfriend, Dinah Shore. He and Carson once engaged in a wild and improvised whipped cream fight during a taping, and he got to show a side of him the public never knew. Before I met Johnny, I played a bunch of angry guys in a series of forgettable action movies, and people didn't know about, and I had a sense of humor. People didn't know I had a sense of humor, he wrote. My appearances on The Tonight Show changed all that. My public image went from a constipated actor who never took a chance to a cocky, wisecracking character. Reynolds showed that the lighter side of him. He played a sperm in Woody Allen's Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, 1972, and he lampooned his lavish Hollywood lifestyle in Mel Brooks' Silent Movie, 1976. He was not above making fun of himself in his toupee. He was bald. In 1979, he opened the Burt Reynolds Theater in Jupiter, Florida, and in the 1980s developed the syndicated game show Win, Lose, or Draw that with host Burt Convey. The set was modeled after his living room. Interesting. After his divorce from Anderson and a bad restaurant investments contributing to more than $10 million in debt, Reynolds filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1996 and came out of it 2 years later. In recent years, he sold properties in Florida, including his fabled 160-acre ranch. The Allman Brothers recorded an album there in the 1990s, and he auctioned off his personal belongings, which I bet are worth a lot now on eBay. My uncle was not just a movie icon. He was a generous, passionate, and sensitive man who was dedicated to his family, friends, fans, and acting students. His niece, Nancy Lee, has said in a statement, he has had health issues. However, this was totally unexpected. He was tough. Anyone who breaks their tailbone on a river and finishes the movie is tough. And that's who he was. My uncle was looking forward to working with Quentin Tarantino and the amazing cast that was assembled. So he was, looks like he was going to work with Quentin in another movie. Survivors also include his son, Quentin. He and Anderson adopted him when he was 3 days old. Despite the ups and downs of Hollywood life, Reynolds seemed to have no regrets. I always wanted to experience everything and go down swinging, he wrote in the final paragraph of his memoir. Well, so far so good. I know I'm old, but I feel young. And there's one thing they can never take. That's one thing they can never take away. Nobody had more fun than I did. So that's it. Burt Reynolds, I do remember he had that plastic surgery and it completely changed the way he looked. I never liked that. But again, I'm going to read that one more time. So Burt, give him hell in heaven. And if you go there, don't rest in peace. Get up there and give him heck. And again, this is the last thing he wrote. I always wanted to experience everything and go down swinging. Well, so far, so good. I know I'm old, but I feel young. And there's one thing they can never take away. Nobody had more fun than I did. So, Burt, see you later for now. Maybe we'll see you in the next one. Take care.